Welcome to CivilNet. At least 24 people across 13 cities in Turkey were arrested in what appears to be a crackdown with those who have links to the US-based Muslim cleric Fethullah Gulen, who is a bitter rival of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey. Among those arrested were the editor-in-chief of Zaman, other journalists, filmmakers, and even some police officers. Now, joining me from Istanbul to talk about these recent events is Emma Sinclair-Webb of Human Rights Watch in Istanbul. Emma, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I think it's clear to us and to most people in the world that media freedoms and media plurality in Turkey has not always been the #1 priority of the government of Turkey. But this latest crackdown, is it presaging perhaps a wider crackdown in Turkey? Talk to us, if you will, about what the fallout has been after these arrests.
Well, the arrests, just to recap on this, basically a whistleblower via Twitter started to tweet information about these arrests coming and warned that they would happen, and even gave names. First of all, it didn't happen, and then it suddenly did happen, and the arrests followed the Prime Minister and the President, both again renewing their commitment to fight against what they call the parallel state, which is what they term the followers of the Fethullah Gulen movement. They accuse the movement of attempting to stage a coup and overthrow the government. This goes back a whole year or more, in fact, to a huge political rivalry between this group's followers and the government. And they used to be former allies. There were a lot of followers of this group in the government, in the bureaucracy, in the judiciary, in the police, and they were very much staunch AKP supporters. So it's only when this political fallout between this group, this political rivalry between this group began, that we started to see the crackdown from the government side on the group. So it's a very peculiar thing to explain to the world, and there aren't other good examples of such a sort of political rivalry as the one we're seeing here. But what it has turned into is a massive crackdown on this group and on anyone associated with it. And it also has involved the government in changing a lot of laws, reshuffling judges, rotating police, demoting judges and police on the grounds that they're linked with this group. The group is also accused by the government of unearthing corruption allegations against the government exactly a year ago, which the government, of course, claims are false. A lot of wiretaps were leaked via social media, which also kind of supported the allegations of corruption against the government. So all of this is the backdrop to the arrests. The arrests themselves they took the form of basically targeting police and a lot of people who we don't even really know who they are, and some journalists. So it's wrong to say that it's entirely a crackdown on the media. Within the crackdown, you've got the editor of Zaman newspaper, the head of the Samanyol TV group, and you've got a couple of columnists for Zaman, and a columnist for Bugün newspaper, and also script writers from the Samanyol TV. That sounds very strange. Why would you have soap opera script writers and a producer in the investigation? That is what's astonished a lot of people.
Yeah, Emma, I just want to interrupt you, if I may, for a second. It is kind of interesting for those of us outside of Turkey, but who also follow as best we can what takes place in that country, to have a Muslim cleric who's in sort of self-imposed exile in the United States continuing to have such a huge presence in the political and social life of what's taking place in Turkey. So in addition to that, I mean, the West is also baffled by all of this, and they've come down quite harshly on Erdogan, particularly with this latest crackdown. And President Martin Schulz of the European Parliament in the plenary session, in his opening remarks, reminded Turkey that it is a candidate country for the EU, and the values of media, plurality, freedoms are very important for the European Union. Do these kinds of statements, these kinds of reactions not impact President Erdogan and his and his government when they hear the West coming down so hardly on them, or they don't really care?
Well, I mean, what we've seen is basically repeated rebuttals of statements. When the EU criticizes Turkey, Erdogan fights back and says, mind your own business, essentially. Keep your nose out of this. There seems to be a high level of readiness here just to ignore all the external criticisms, including from groups like us, from Human Rights Watch and other human rights groups. So, no, they do seem to be absolutely intent on fighting what they consider to be their political rivals, who have infiltrated government, as they see it, and infiltrated the bureaucracy. And they want to kind of get rid of these people, essentially. Now, the charge of coup plotting is a really, really serious one. And so far, we have not seen yet enough evidence to support such a severe charge. So that's what we're waiting for. All of this is shrouded in a kind of mystery, and there's no transparency about a lot of this, because a lot of the evidence against those who are accused is being withheld at the moment. And it's very arcane and difficult to explain to outsiders. So I think there is a lot of bafflement in Europe and the US about this and about how to tackle it. But for us, apart from the sort of political intrigue aspect of it, the real concern is that this year we've seen an unprecedented erosion of the rule of law in Turkey. Turkey always had a very politicized judiciary and a police that intervened heavily and disproportionately against demonstrators, a lot of police abuse still carrying on. But the government's reaction to the Gulenists has been to try to take absolute control over the judiciary by reshuffling hundreds, thousands of personnel and judges, prosecutors. Same with the police. So there's a real kind of power grab going on where they want to undermine any idea of judicial independence or impartiality. But I do need to say here that, of course, the judiciary before was highly political and highly problematic in Turkey. So it's not that they started with a clean slate at the beginning of the year and things have got just much worse. It's rather that you've had factions, and the Gulenist faction was probably the biggest, that had very great power in these institutions. And of course, that doesn't contribute to having an independent and impartial judiciary if you have allegiances that are not to the rule of law, but are to rather other, political bases. So what Turkey really needs is to overhaul its judiciary to make it really independent and really reliable and away, outside executive control or political faction control.
Right. I mean, you partially answered my next and final question. Fethullah Gulen, as I said, self-imposed exile, and you've been living in Istanbul now for a number of years. Obviously, you follow the events very, very closely, as part of your job and probably just as somebody who lives in that country. Does Gulen have that kind of power? Has he been able to infiltrate all the different branches of government, from even the police? Now, I know this requires some conjecture on your part, but it's interesting to know if he does hold that kind of leverage in his hands today.
I think it's very hard to know because it's not transparent in any way, so it's very hard to prove it. And organizations like us, we really require proof of things. We don't like to go into sort of political speculation. But saying that, what we have seen in recent years is a massive series of sort of mass trials, mainly against Kurds who have been accused of membership of the PKK or KCK in, very really trumped up charges against people who were essentially Kurdish political activists for the most part and hadn't been involved in violent activities, but got accused of being, terrorists. Now, those kinds of trials, plus trials against the military, trials against the Ergenekon gang, as it was called, these trials were highly politicized, both in their focus and then also in the level of, violations of fair trial rights. So this was an indication that a certain political position was being played out within the judiciary to target, for example, most clearly Kurdish activists, also to some extent the military, but more so the Kurdish activists. And, they weren't being prosecuted according to, criminal evidence of their criminal activities, but rather because they were somehow associated in the minds of prosecutors and judges with being followers or supporters of the PKK's ideas. And that's one of the biggest problems in Turkey. The judiciary has been used in a very political way. I do think the Gulenists contributed to that very, very much. But what the government is now doing is our main focus, because it's putting its cadres in place, replacing the Gulenists with its own boys, in a sense. And that is not a recipe for, the rule of law in a democratic country. So Turkey's democratic credentials have been severely undermined. At the same time, there's an enormous increase in police powers, with two big laws that are one has gone through and another will go through soon. And that's another kind of concern, that, you increase the powers of the security services at a time when you're feeling under threat. Some of these reactions by the government are reactions to feeling under siege by the Gulenists, accused of corruption, but, ready to really fight back in ways that damage the rule of law.
Right. Well, certainly a lot to think about and a lot to follow. So thank you, Emma, for taking the time to talk to us today about this recent crackdown.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. And I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest via Skype from Istanbul was Emma Sinclair-Webb of Human Rights Watch. Stay with CivilNet.